Good afternoon, everybody. 1 week from yesterday, so 6 days from now, the symposium will be happening in MSC, Healthier Food for a Healthier World. If you haven't registered yet, we encourage you to do so on our website, plantbreedingsymposium.com. Make sure you register in order to have free lunch and everything. Also, we are really in need of volunteers to help make the event run smoothly. So if some of the graduate students in the audience would like to sign up to help us, either set up in the morning, help us serve lunch, be microphone holders, etc. We really need you. We'll give you a t-shirt today if you sign up. You can talk to Dustin after Plant Breeding Circle for more information on that. And then, so we're going to have a kind of a special day on Friday next week at Plant Breeding Circle at 11 o'clock a.m. The Plant Breeding and Genetics Graduate Student Organization is hosting a graduate student-only panel discussion with our keynote speakers. So all grad students are invited to attend, and we'll have kind of an informal discussion with the keynote speakers starting at 11. We can talk about things in more general terms. If you're a little bit hesitant to ask questions during the event on Thursday, this will be your chance on Friday morning. Dr. Smith will be showing up for some pizza for all of us too, so there'll be free food as well, so no excuses. Then at 12 o'clock, everybody is invited to come to Plant Breeding and Genetics Circle like normal. We have 4 travel scholarship recipients from different universities. They'll be on campus for the entire symposium. This will be their chance on next Friday at noon to give their research presentation. So we have individuals from University of Georgia, University of Minnesota, Cornell University, and University of Florida. They'll be giving 15-minute presentations from 12 to 1, and of course, at that time, everybody's welcome to join in. They're four very good students, and I think that you'll find that interesting. So, just to reiterate, we need volunteers for the event. You can talk to Dustin afterwards if you'd like to sign up.
If you didn't catch it, volunteer. If y'all have been here for longer than a year, you'll recognize our speaker today. Tony Watson finished the PhD in my program last summer. He worked on our millets and our sorghums, and he has since, I guess, day one after he graduated, he took over the breeding program for Sharp Brothers. He's going to visit with you about how he's driven that program since then. Tony.
Hello, everyone. Good to be back. Slides.
The arrow keys on the keyboard.
Okay. Basically, what I'm going to be doing today is taking you through the process that I've gone through working for a smaller company that wants to start a breeding program from pretty much ground zero. I'm it. There's no lab. There's not much of a budget. There's no staff. There's nobody going to be running markers for me or anything like that. It's old school cowboy breeding. That's what we've got, but got some really good people that have been with the company for a long time that going to make it go. So Sharp Brothers Seed Company, and I'll show you where we're located here in just a minute. We're mostly focused on forage type sorghums and native warm season perennial grasses. Just a little bit about Kansas in case you're not familiar with Kansas agriculture. Whereas in Texas we've over the decades kind of branched out from being primarily agricultural to petroleum and now technology industries. Mostly in Kansas, it's just a very heavy agriculture state. It's very important. One of the things that I've noticed is that all the university, private, different kinds of organizations, whether it's the NRCS or the Cattlemen's Association or what it might be, they work very closely together. Everybody knows we have to pitch in and do our job. Kansas is the #1 grain sorghum state. Obviously, Kansas and Texas dominate sorghum. Traditionally, Kansas has been a very heavy wheat state. In recent years, with the very high corn prices, a lot of those acres have gone into corn. #2 in sorghum for silage. The feeder cattle industry is pretty big in Kansas, and that's primarily why. And just a little statistic, still in the top 10 in corn, but far behind the main Midwestern states. So this is where we're located, kind of in about about an hour, hour and a half east of the Colorado state line. There are actually several companies in this general regional area, including Colorado and Kansas and Nebraska, definitely in Texas, that are probably sell between $5 and $10 million worth of seed a year, that operate very much on a regional basis. And the value of the seed is such that you can't really afford to ship it more than about 400 or 500 miles away from where you grow it. So by nature, we're all kind of doing the same thing. And as I'll get to later, you notice that companies that are located in this pretty much the same place, they don't get along so great because they're competing, but people that are farther away get along a lot better. So we have a great relationship with the guys in Texas, but the people in our own backyard, not so much. Okay. Each of these red dots represents a feedlot. And this little circle right here, that's about 2 million head of cattle on feed at any given time. So obviously that's our industry. As I'll talk a little bit later about the water resources and how that's changing over time. And if the feedlot industry ever kind of goes out of southwestern Kansas, that's pretty much the economy. That's where the jobs are. Another aspect of Kansas, I think it's something about as you travel from east to west across the state, the elevation increases about 8 feet per mile. So you're kind of going from about what it is here to the Yellow Star in the western part there is, I think, half a mile from the Colorado state line, about 4,000 feet. Our farm's about 3,000 feet. Why is that important? It gets a lot hotter in the summer than you might think in Kansas, but the nights in the summer are fairly cool, and that enables us to get decent yields. If it wasn't for that, things would be pretty difficult. The precipitation zones in Kansas are pretty similar to what they are in Texas as far as going from the mid-40s, 40 inches, 45 inches per year in the southeastern corner. But you notice how narrow these bands are. We are right here where the Blue Star is located. Ostensibly about 20 inches of precip a year. That's extremely variable. There's a lot of years we're lucky to get maybe 12 or 13 inches, so we're pretty heavily reliant on irrigation. And just a little bit of a look at Colorado. There's our facility there in the north central part of the state. So west of the 16-inch line, as you get closer to the Rocky Mountains, that's the rain shadow of the mountains. They've had several years of drought up until this past year. They're lucky to get 7 or 8 inches a lot of years. So, but this river right here, where we do some seed harvesting, this is pretty much snow melt from the mountains. And what producers are able to do that live in this valley is irrigate to keep it from flooding, and basically they have a lot of sub-irrigated meadows and pastures and fields, so they're able to be pretty productive for that region. I went ahead and put this slide kind of out of order of the rest of the presentation so that it would be towards the beginning. One of the things I was immediately hit with at a smaller company, it's basically me and the gentleman that I'm taking over for is about to retire, basically, as seed production manager. And I'll be doing that plus breeding. It's pretty much myself and the president of the company kind of making the business decisions about what we're going to do, what genetics we're going to get, how we're going to market things and stuff like that. So it's really kind of thrust into the business side of plant breeding pretty quickly, whereas maybe in a larger company you may not have to deal with that very much, if at all. You hear this a lot. It just sounds like a mantra repeated over and over, how important relationships are in business. but it is absolutely crucial. If we didn't have the relationships that we have with certain companies, we wouldn't have access to the genetics at all. And I was recently at a company last year looking at their new parental lines for making our hybrids. And it's the difference between when you go there, do you get to see the dog and pony show, and these are the new lines, and seeing that, and getting to see the stuff that's actually in their breeding nursery that they're bringing along, because they want to know what we think. Do we agree with their assessments of what the new lines are going to be, and making those kind of choices? So I guess I didn't do it enough as a student. Maybe you're already doing it, I don't know. But walk through the fields and just put yourself kind of, just pretend you're in the driver's seat, and it's like, all right, this was my program. What choices would I make? What stuff am I going to throw out? What am I going to keep going, to keep making progress? And what are the needs of the farmers? And what are they going to be willing to adopt? What we're seeing in the sorghum industry is, I'm pretty sure that the forage sorghums are going to be 100% brown midrib within, say, 5 years. But they probably should already be there. Just getting older farmers not willing to adopt some of the new traits and so forth. There's it's kind of one of the neat things I was exposed to early on, the Kansas Wheat Alliance. Basically, a lot of relatively small companies pooled their resources together, and it's like, all right, at our local university, we really need a wheat breeder. Let's put the money together, pay this person, give them the farm equipment and the lab equipment that they need to be successful, and so we have a pipeline of genetics that we'll have access to for the foreseeable future. So that's been another way to kind of demonstrate how people are willing to, we're competitors, but also working closely together for common goals. And AgSeedCo, another basically consortium of several companies, I think it's up to maybe 20 or so organizations that are part of that. So we do have the pipeline of Kansas State genetics coming through on the wheats, but the TAM varieties have really done very well for us on our farm for production, and then being good in the field in Kansas, so we've been pretty happy with that. Let's see. So on production contracts, we have about a 5,000-6,000 acre farm, and we produce most of our seed there. And then we have people, private farmers, that are growing seed for us. One of the things that we kind of have to deal with, you have to pay your growers, and kind of, you know, this time of year we're selling seed, so there's a little bit of cash flow, let's say ebbs and flows that you kind of have to deal with there. And another thing that we do is we harvest true native seed, whether it might be wildflowers or grasses and that sort of thing, on people's private ranches and so forth. So it's kind of an interesting way to set up a contract. People can either take cash up front per combine hour, or they can retain ownership of about 1/3 of the seed. And then, you know, it kind of just depends on the market price. With a lot of the crops that we grow, the price of the seed is really unknown. It can fluctuate anywhere from 2, 3, 4 times up or down from year to year, depending on supply and demand. So it's not like selling seed corn, where you pretty well know from year to year what it's going to cost. All right. So back to the environment. So what you're seeing here is the decrease in saturated thickness of the groundwater resource in Kansas, and looks fairly similar in Texas. We're here. Part of our fields are to the south of the star there, And then to the north, kind of on that edge, it hasn't gone down much. And then we have a ranch up here in the next county. It's just pretty interesting, some of the conversations that you have with farmers about this issue. Some people take it pretty seriously. Other people, I've talked to people in Texas, you get the same reaction. I've been hearing about the water resources going down for 30 years. They keep saying that over and over again, but we still have water, we're still going to irrigate. Well, it's not, this, for practical purposes in our lifetime, this aquifer here does not recharge. So it is what it is. I think about 8 or 10 years ago, some of our main fields that we produce a lot of our seed on were putting out about 750 gallons per minute. And now we're down to about 300, 350 if we're lucky. So, we own the land that we own. We have the resource that we have. This is a family-owned business. So my challenge in the rest of my working career, assuming I stay with Sharps, is to think about, as a breeder, you really got to think ahead. What am I going to do heading into potentially very limited irrigation or dry land agriculture situations? They've already gone from flood irrigating to sprinkler, and that'll get you so far. Here's basically a look at the same thing, just showing Kansas and Texas. You can kind of see, it's probably a familiar story to many of you. Diminishing water resources that we have available for irrigated agriculture.
In Texas, the irrigation water is going to decrease from 56% to 38% in 2060. So that's like an 18% decrease in irrigation water. Of course, we're competing with urban and industrial needs, and so we have to increase the water use efficiency in our crops, or just eliminate some of the acreage, right?
Yeah, my brother-in-law lives in Texas, and he's on the water board in his county, and he's very much an agriculture associated person. But still, the needs and the political power of the municipalities outweigh agriculture, because they're not really getting what they need for it. And then we're located about right here, kind of on this edge where there's a gap where there's no aquifer. It's pretty much just pastures in there. Okay. And the last map here, high soil pH is another issue for us. And probably one of the main reasons that's important, it's not really so much the nutrient availability issue, it's what kind of herbicides you can use or not use. If you've ever had to establish native perennial grasses from seed, they grow pretty slowly and they're not really very competitive with weeds. So if you take away pre-emergent herbicides and that kind of thing, it can be pretty challenging to get them established. Okay. A little bit more about the environment. So coming from here, we've got basically from March to November are frost-free days. A little bit different in Kansas. Again, in the middle of the continent, it's very variable, exactly how many frost-free days you're going to have. Mentioned the altitude. Our soils tend to have low organic matter. We would love to be 100% no-till, but some of the herbicide tolerance development and weeds has kind of prevented us from doing that. Great soil texture. Talked about the irrigation, the water relationship to the forage for feed industry. So we're on the 4th generation of the family running the business. One of the challenges, quite frankly, is this is the first generation where the head of the company doesn't really know very much about farming. He's a businessman. doesn't really want to know about the agronomic side, trusting people like myself to take care of it. So it's a pretty serious responsibility. The companies have got very much a production mindset and not so much a breeding mindset. So communication and knowing when to push and how hard to push is kind of something I kind of need to figure out. So it's a little challenging. We do the sorghum, sedan grass, native grasses. We'll talk about cover crops a little bit more in a minute. We have some alfalfa. We don't grow our own seed for that. Like I said, wheat. The wheat seed business is pretty tough to be in. And I kind of struggle whether or not to say this, but I'm really a big believer in being straight with people. One of the really aggravating things about wheat seed, and I'm sure this happens other places too, is what's called brown bagging. Anybody ever heard of brown bagging? Anybody know what that is? It's where people save seed and they sell it to their buddy down the road for just a little bit above what wheat would go for at the elevator, and it really undercuts people that kind of do things the right way and growing certified and registered seed and doing things legally. So because of where we are, if you're not a seed company like ourselves, basically our neighbors are sorghum, wheat, fallow, crop rotation. So wheat is an important part of the crop rotation, but right now the price of wheat is below the break-even price for farmers, so it's a pretty challenging spot to be in from that aspect. The farm itself, this isn't all cultivated acres, but the whole property is about 5,800 acres. About 2,000 of that is in pasture for cow-calf that we're kind of starting up. The irrigation circles are all a quarter section, about 131 acres, and most of them are divided into anywhere from 2 to 5 parcels, and then all the corners are also separate fields, and you might have different things on the 4 corners. So it's a lot of different fields to keep track of. Makes it challenging. Our native grasses are pretty profitable, so those are all under irrigation. So are the forage sorghums. And as I talked about with Dr. Jessup, it's a great environment for millet. It's a great fit from the where we're located from a geographic standpoint, but getting people to do that, to grow millet more than sorghum or some other crops can be pretty challenging. So just a little chart here to show you how it breaks down for acreage for the cultivated part of the farm. About a quarter of the acres are under grass. The grasses go from anywhere from about $5 to $15 a pound, just to kind of give you an idea of the economics. Fallow is an important part of the rotation. Probably about 1,000 acres or so of wheat seed. The sorghum part here, this is our sorghum for seed, and then we grow some cash grain sorghum, just a little bit. The millets are Japanese millet and German R, and then you can get a little bit of a premium for corn if you do the wet corn program for the feedlots, which you're selling at 30 to 35% moisture. Okay. And the warm season grasses breakdown. I'm not sure how familiar you are with some of these species, but buffalo grass is a big product for us. This is pretty much for turf. And then water blue stem, switchgrass, Indian grass, cytostrama, big blue stem, and so on. These are all going to be mainly for CRP or other pasture mixes. They're seldom sold just as a single species unless we're selling to another seed company, and then they're going to put it into a mix and sell it later. There's a lot of companies like ourselves that are buying and selling from each other what we need to complete orders, because when we get an order, it'll be a sheet of species about this long, and you just mix it together and bag it up and send it out. Okay. So looking at some of the challenges, probably the biggest one is that there's more companies. It's just like a field, you know, there's more plants out there competing for the same resources. It is what it is. Salespeople are getting more aggressive. People get pretty touchy about, you know, if Dr. Rooney has a grower or dealer that he's been dealing with for a long time, and then I go and talk to his guy, he's going to get upset. So whereas before in years past, people kind of, there were sort of quote unquote boundaries and people respected those. It's getting a little different. The Conservation Reserve Program, where acres are set aside, you know, native wildflowers and grasses are grown for wildlife and other benefits. The maximum allowable acres was 25% for a long time, and at the height of the program it was bumped up to 33%. Now it's been ratcheted back to 25%. So for ourselves, for a grass company, the Conservation Reserve Program was sort of our money wagon for a long time, so to speak, and that's slowed down quite a bit. Another thing, I'm not trying to pick on people who work for the USDA, because I know that's not their fault, but when a bid is placed for CRP acreage, it'll list the species and the variety, and there's a variety list, and you know it's a government entity, so the list doesn't really change much over time. So you can go out and you can do some great breeding make some improvements in quality or yield in some of these pasture grasses. But if that variety isn't on the list, nobody's ever going to buy it. So you see the same varieties. A lot of these were selected in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. They're still being used today. So it is what it is. The Bureau of Land Management purchases a lot of seed for restoration after the fire season. And this depends on how bad the fire season is. Their needs fluctuate a lot. So it's hard to know what to produce and how much from year to year. One of the reasons I was brought in was to start this breeding program is, you know, we rely on other companies, other organizations for our genetics, for a lot of our perennial lines, for our hybrids. Company gets sold, that agreement may be nixed. You have basically no warning. You're cut off from your, you know, genetics access. And if you don't plan ahead for that, that can be pretty devastating. So that's kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing. All right, here's just a little graph of the Bureau of Land Management. You can kind of see go from 500,000 acres to 500,000 pounds to 6.5 million pounds from one year to the next and back down. So this is from the mid-90s to about 2010, to kind of give you an idea. And we've spoken to them recently, and I went to a presentation not too long ago where they're trying to even some of that out, because everybody kind of has the same issue there, but it's kind of just the reality of what they do. You can see here in this little map of each dot is, I guess, 1,000 acres of Conservation Reserve Program enrollment. You know, in this high plains area in North Texas and western Kansas, pretty important. And the CRP acreage has really started to slide down. Working in our industry is not like working with you know, the Corn or Soybean Association, where you can go to Washington and have a fair degree of political pull. We can go and lobby our hearts out, but you know, the government obviously is going to have to make cuts somewhere. And this is one of the areas that that's being trimmed down little by little. Okay, changing gears a little bit. If you're not familiar with the old world blue stems, several of them were bred in Texas, I believe. These are basically introduced species that are fairly closely related to the warm season perennial grasses that we grow. Originally, when they were brought over here, it was a godsend. They establish quickly, they reseed themselves, they do well. If you want to stabilize a roadside or hillside or something, it works great. But as far as forage quality, once they get to a certain point, the quality declines and the livestock will tend to reject it if they have anything else to eat at all. So it's really starting to encroach into a lot of pastures and farmland in Kansas. So this is something I've been working on quite a bit, because we produce a seed crop and you got to send it in to get it certified, and they're going to look at the any exotic or invasive weed seeds that might be in there. It's kind of a big problem. Folks at K-State have done some research looking at a couple of different herbicide options. Now, if you're looking at pasture land, it's a little expensive to be out there spraying 1, 2, 3 times a year, maybe 2 years in a row to try to get rid of it. One of the things that I did this past fall was I just got an app on my phone. This is part of a picture of a half circle of little blue stem. Little blue stem in a pure stand doesn't really like to be really close together and have a close interplant distance. It didn't evolve that way. So kind of naturally, there'll be a clump here and a clump there. And so for an invasive species like old world blue stems, they will find places, and of course these are the wheel tracks from the irrigation pivot. And then I don't know if you can tell, but like here's one side of the track, and here, this pin is from the other side of the track. And it's a nice little app. You can attach pictures, and these red pins represent areas that are a little bit bigger. I took a picture and took some notes on it about how big it is. So this is at the end of the season. All of our native grass seed production fields are burned every spring. So I don't know if anybody ever participate in a prescribed burn? Anybody? Setting things on fire is kind of fun. You can get paid for it. It's nice. And then I'm just going to go back after it's burned and the first growth comes back on, because the little blue stem tends to green up a little later in the spring than other species. We'll go back in and spray those spots and try to get rid of it. But just like Texas, we have prevailing southerly winds, so here's the southern border of the field, and then it's just continued to spread all the way throughout. All right, looking out at the horizon, I've mentioned this several times. This reduction in irrigation capacity is what I see. And I put the question to the senior management right away, what do you think we should do going forward? And all I get is, I don't know. So it puts it directly back on me. Figure it out. So I don't have all the answers yet, but probably one of them is I'm going to use my greenhouse this summer probably and grow some of my sorghum lines that I'm really interested in the greenhouse in the summer, and call it the abuse environment, and just see which ones will do well under fairly severe stress. Traditionally, corn silage was used a lot in our area for the feeder cattle. You don't see much anymore. Why? It's because of the drop in water. You can grow sorghum silage and get pretty good tonnage and use about 1/3 less water. One of the things that's been kind of interesting for me, I like to work on different species. For these irrigation circles for the feedlots, you'll see sorghum, sorghum sudangrass, and triticale all kind of being used here, there, and yonder. On Watley Seeds website, I found on individual producer's farm, they got 62% of the yield of corn for 42% of the cost of corn, primarily in fertilizer savings, just by growing triticale. We've had pretty good natural rains for the last 2 years, well above average. So there's another challenge. Our product did very well, but we've got producers telling us they've got 3 years worth of silage in the pit. So what are we going to sell next year to pay our bills? It's kind of a curse of being successful, I guess, sometimes. Again, the business for these smaller and medium-sized companies is regional. I can think of at least 4 companies in Texas that are pretty much very, very similar to ourselves and in all the neighboring states. And we all operate pretty much with that same 400-mile radius. That's kind of how it works. Mention that. So here's just a look at we always see progression in traits, and once something kind of catches on, it's going to kind of become the standard. So for triticale, here's the traditional, see how long the awns are, and it's called the awn-leaded, or very, very little in the way of awns on the seed head there. This is taken from our product catalog, and there's really, I think, 2 main germplasm sources for this trait right now. So you get the yield. We have a lot of heavy winds in the high plains, of course. Standability is always a huge issue for any putting on genetics. Early maturity has enabled us to make some sales there. Why? Because people want to put in another crop after the triticale comes off. This is irrigated ground. They want to put out as many pounds or bushels or whatever per square foot that they possibly can, and then have this trait so that cattle like it better. It's kind of an interesting story I wanted to relate to you as you kind of move into another phase of your career. I'm not going to name any names, but one of the gentlemen that came up with this and was able to get this awn-leaded trait, company he worked for was sold, and he didn't really like the management of the new company very well. And so he said, you know what, I'm going to just take my show on the road and I'm going to go somewhere else and be a breeder for them. And if you become the indispensable person, it gives you the leverage to do things like that. Now that's something I recommend you do earlier in your career. Of course, I've been breeding triticale and wheat for a long time, but it's just a great strategy whether you're in a big company or small company or anywhere, think about what you need to do to become the indispensable person. It's like, wow, we just can't imagine having this program without Joe or Mary or whomever. Okay. All right. Change of pace a little bit. Has anybody heard about cover crops and becoming kind of a big thing? Right. Especially in the Midwest where they have more rain and there's a little bit maybe better setup for doing this kind of thing. It just kind of depends on what you want to do, but you might have problems with compaction, when you build up organic matter, break up pest and disease cycles, use it as a forage, which for ourselves is probably going to be one of the keys for a whole range of other things that you might do. But what a lot of folks are doing now is, like, say you're growing corn. You can aerial seed before the corn is harvested. Let your cover crops start to come up a little bit in the fall. And then it's going to, of course, your grain crop is going to come off. And that'll allow your cover crop to continue to grow well into the fall, and then, if it's an annual, it's going to winter kill, or you burn it down with a herbicide maybe in the spring or something. This is something that, a lot of these species that are used as cover crops are also forages, so something that we're very interested in. But growing C3 plants in our environment, as you can probably guess from the first half, pretty tough. It's just really is too hot in the summer. But trying to figure out how to incorporate it, not just for seed production, but for you to use the actual benefits itself. One of the things that we run into in our area is that farmers are under a lot of intense pressure to be as profitable as they can from year to year. And it hasn't been that long ago we had the big run up in grain prices, so it pushed up land prices and rents, and that really hasn't settled back down to really what's a reasonable level for our area for the productivity that you can expect. So getting people to plant cover crops just to build up soil organic matter or whatever it might be isn't enough. It's $20 to $25 an acre. But unless you can use it as a forage or something like that, it's a little bit hard to justify. But I think we all know enough agronomy to know that it's, crop rotations and that sort of thing are pretty important. You can kind of take these numbers with a grain of salt. This is from a survey, but it just shows kind of the general trend in acreage just in over a 6-year period. I don't know how much more it's going to take off. This is another kind of program where a lot of traditional farmers are going to go out in a field that's been planted with a mixture of 6 different cover crops and say, "That's like a bunch of weeds to me. Why do I want to do that?" So there's a little bit of need for those really progressive champion farmers to kind of go out and do some of the early work. And a lot of the research that you see is really done by the producers themselves and not so much by the universities. This is not from my company. This is from a company out of Pennsylvania called Cover Crop Solutions. But it just kind of shows you, I think you can kind of see there that these have been bred specifically for breaking up soil compaction. These are radishes that you plant in the fall. I've been to demonstrations where they'll pull some of these radishes out of the ground and they're that big around and that long, which is not necessarily what you need exactly to break up compaction, but it does the job. But I really like this graphic here. And again, you're going to put it on before the corn probably comes off, and then it's going to reach its peak of growth as right after harvest, winter kill, and then start releasing its nutrients into the next growing season. It's a great agro-ecosystem thing to do. They're pretty easy to establish. A lot of people are using annual ryegrass this way. It's becoming kind of a big thing. I kind of brought this up as this is rapidly expanding, and there's companies that are kind of specializing in this. And if you're like myself and kind of thinking about, well, it'd be nice to work with something other than corn or cotton or soybeans or something like that, something a little different. There are other avenues out there. You're not always going to find, like myself, not necessarily going to find ads on the internet job boards and stuff like that for some of these companies. Just send them your resume. I stand here and tell you, I did not get a single interview from Monsanto or Pioneer or any of those companies. I didn't even get an interview. I went down to, not down, but over to agronomy services and that kind of thing. Didn't really get much of a response. I got my job. I went on LinkedIn, found a recruiter, happened to be in Kansas. happened to know this company, and they saw forages and sorghum. And they just happened to do that. That was their portfolio. I was like, oh, this is a perfect person. And the fact that I came from this university, that was also a big deal. Yeah. All right. A little bit more about cover crops. If you haven't heard about Maryland's program, they have a huge environmental problem with, they've got lots of cities right next to Chesapeake Bay trying to improve the water quality, and EPA has come in and said, this must be fixed. Come up with a plan to reduce runoff, reduce the nutrient load coming into the bay. So look right there. And I can show you the PDF. You can get, if you do all the little things, if you're no-till and if it's right as your cover crop and do all these little things, you can get $100 an acre with no acreage cap for growing cover crops after your cash crop has come off every year. How much does it cost to seed rye per acre? I think it's a couple of bushels an acre. It's pretty minimal. So it's working, and like I said, we saw the graph a little bit a while ago that showed that 400, 500,000 acres total. The Maryland Department of Agriculture just reported last month that almost 500,000 acres are enrolled in this program just in their state, which if you ever look at a map of Maryland without the water, it's not very big. So there's some real opportunities out there for these kind of species too. This is kind of an inventive little thing that somebody did at the USDA. It's the cover crop periodic table. It's kind of interesting. So on the right half, you've got your warm season grasses, and then from here over, these are the cool seasons, and you've got grasses on the ends. Then you've got, whether it's an annual or perennial in the top right-hand corner, relative amount of water use in the top right. There's your key at the top, and then, is it upright or prostrate or whatever. So out in our area, we're getting some people to use some of the millets. I told you a little bit about the wheat story. So there's people in our area that are looking at it saying, why do I need to grow wheat? If I can come up with a forage program and use millets and maybe some of the mustards and radishes and some of those kind of things, you have a spring, summer cover crop / forage season, have a fall, winter cover crop season, you can make a cow-calf program go pretty well just with that. So this just kind of gives you some idea of some of the species. Outside of our area where it's not so hot in the summer, probably clovers, small grains are kind of going to be your staples for cover crops. All right. So now on to the breeding program, probably what you're more interested in. So what did I do to get started with the breeding program from scratch? Well, what do we have that's ours? I had to figure all that out, and it wasn't as easy as it sounds. Fortunately, they did give me plenty of time to sit down. I had the growing season and most of this winter to sit down and figure out what do we need to do. Luckily, I was able to keep my password to get into the library, did a lot of reading, looked at a lot of the research that I hadn't necessarily had a chance to look at before. It was nice. It was almost like being in grad school with no classes, no tests, no exams. You can just sit down and think about, what do I need to do? Finding the germplasm. Talked about relationships before. I can't emphasize that enough. If you even have any confidence at all that you're good with people, it'll help you immensely in breeding. It will. And another thing, a little nugget I wanted to pass on today was what it's like when you go to a company and they're trying to sell you their genetics. They're looking at you. I mean, I was with my boss, and they'd known for 40 years, and it's kind of the guy who really makes the final decisions. But they knew I was the breeder. They were looking at me to see how I reacted to their stuff. And I kind of tend to be a kind of a quiet, stoic person at times, so I could tell they were getting worried. It wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Make them, they're selling to you. You're the customer. If you're ever in that position, it does give you some power. Don't abuse it, but recognize that how you react, your body language, what you say, how you interact with them, it does matter. They do care what you think, and they're looking for validation sometimes. I think that, 501 is that's the stuff, that's great. And I looked at it and I thought, well, what are those little plants right there? You have a little bit of a purity problem. So, you can take it for what it's worth. Kind of wanted to give some feedback on what I thought of some of the courses that I took here. As you can probably tell from my presentation so far, taking Dr. Jessup's intellectual property rights course was really helpful because I had to look at contracts and agreements and all kinds of things, and so we had something to draw on. I wouldn't necessarily have gotten from just a pure science and breeding course load. You can kind of read this last line, you probably already have. I said I'm not going to have to really worry about markers or QTLs because it's not going to be much of an issue for me. The basic designs, we studied those because they work. They're a tremendous resource to draw on, and it's going to be what I use as I go forward with my program. This is a little bit awkward because I can't really talk like exactly what traits I'm shooting for just yet because it's kind of a new thing we're hoping to be the first to market with. But we start talking about crops like sorghum. You can grow it for grain. You can grow it for forage. If you're going to do a dual-use crop, my first thought is, well, when I first start the program from scratch, I'm going to be able to pull stuff that's really from very different germplasm pools and put them together, so I should get pretty good variation in the F2s to look at and really give us an opportunity to drive forward successfully with the traits that we're interested in. And then there's also a fairly broad pool of material to draw from as we kind of want to continue to get that yield advantage or look for those traits. So now I know what it's like to other people pretty much have, I think I pretty well know that other people have a very similar idea about what we're trying to do with this dual-use sorghum, so we're going to be able to be first to market or not. I don't have a nursery in Costa Rica or Puerto Rico to use in the winter. I have a greenhouse. But one thing I've learned in 44 years on this earth is persistence is a very powerful trait to have as a person. And as a plant breeder, I think also is true. You're trying to launch a new product. You might have a great product. Doesn't mean it's going to sell well. There's going to be a lot of things that you don't really have any more control over. I think we had a similar presentation to mine last spring. The gentleman from Ball, I can't remember his name, I think he worked with the ROSE program here, talked about needing to sell internally, convince the salespeople and product development people that this is going to be a good thing, so they'll go out and want to utilize it commercially. And the last point, I think we've all heard that the breeding is an art and a science, both. Creativity, what you understand about the production agriculture, the agronomics, the biology, the traits, the breeding, all of that will come into play. Don't be afraid to rely on all those things to figure out what to do. So what do I do exactly? Believe it or not, I do not have a job title. They told me that they're not real big on job titles. If you see my business card, there isn't one there. But I'm the breeder / seed production manager. So I'm going to be trying to breed and oversee the seed harvesting, running combine crews, which go from eastern Colorado to central Kansas at times. Really keep an eye on the breeding pipeline. One of the challenges about the paperwork, if this was a simpler farm, filing with the Farm Security Agency and crop insurance would be pretty simple, but we have 5,000 acres, but 150, 200 different fields to keep track of. So there's a sort of a paperwork load. I don't know how much you guys follow some of the coatings and stuff that's becoming fairly regular, whether it's a herbicide safener or something like that with a lot of the commercial agronomic crops, but we're working on some of that. So again, that's pretty much me. Of course, the milling operation to clean the seed. And then our salesmen primarily sell to the dealers, but a lot of the sort of the bulk loads that go to other seed companies that we sort of trade back and forth with, we handling that as well. Just to kind of give you an idea about what I do day to day. A lot of times people want to look at the equipment, so this is what we have. We have, I think, 4 or 5 of the smaller 2588s. People are always really interested in how can you harvest seeds that are chaffy and so tiny. So use a little bit smaller combine. And then there's the stripper header. So you're going to go actually about this height, maybe just a little bit higher over grasses that might be 5-6 feet tall. And then we'll just go over it and just strip the heads off and pull it right in. And then probably the better picture is the one on the right. So this, of course, is pumping out air, and you've got an array of air tubes blowing in this really light chaffy seed so it doesn't get lost when it's first harvested. That's an air reel combine header. Okay. I got to tell you this story because several of you are going to be going out in the job market. People still do these little tricks with job interviews, and I heard one, so I just thought I'd pass it along. I call it the old cow story. We're kind of at a time in agronomy and agricultural fields and universities where not everybody comes from a farm anymore, and that's not such a big deal. It's just about being a good worker and knowing the things that you need to know. To a lot of employers, it does matter, because in their mind, if you're from a farm, you understand what hard work is. You have a certain kind of values, and you, for lack of a better phrase, you get it. So there's a whole list of questions that you cannot ask people at job interviews. But once the interview is over, so to speak, and you're kind of on your way out the door, people do things. So there's a guy that I met at a trade show, I think a couple weeks ago. What he does, he's been doing this for 20 years, but he's only gotten burned once. As the interviewee is walking out of the room, he'll ask, when an old cow gets up from laying down, which end gets up first? And if they can answer like that, that tells him that kid's probably from a farm. He didn't ask the question. He asked his little workaround question. I haven't had to really deal with stuff like that. I'm just kind of thought I would relay that to you, and you can take it for what it's worth. $7 corn. The point that I'm trying to make here is what happened to me when I graduated last summer was grain prices had gone down. Monsanto and Pioneer had laid off some of their junior breeders that had only been with the company for a year or two, so the market was flooded with people that had a little bit of experience and then all the other people coming out of college looking for those entry-level breeder positions. And so it was pretty tough to find anything, quite frankly. And hopefully your experience is a lot better. Have an edge. Being an Aggie matters. And well, I guess we're running short on time. I had a little story there. I'll have to skip it. The other thing I wanted to share, I've kind of come into the job market twice. I got my master's in the 90s. I came back to school for my PhD just recently. By that time, precision agriculture was just getting started. So pretty soon after I graduated, my skill set had become pretty well obsolete. If you didn't know precision farming, other people who did had a big edge on you in the job market. What I'm seeing, and one of the things that we want to do, especially because we don't have the molecular biology resources like a lot of folks do, is we're going to try to use drones. We already have one on our farm to do the phenotyping and make improvements that way. And I see, well, it's like a lot of technologies. You don't have to know how to do everything, but if you can utilize it in breeding or physiology or physiological breeding, whatever it is that you do, it's going to give you an edge. My advice, if you can get any exposure while you're here or at some point with unmanned aerial vehicles or drones or whatever you want to call them, I would highly recommend that you do that. One of the things that I've seen people do at larger companies is, when you have a technology or a platform or a software, you have a user, you have your more advanced intermediate users, then you sometimes will have what they call a super user. So I would see this as a kind of a point where if you become like a super user, if you become that indispensable person who can kind of do the technical stuff and the field stuff with the drones, I really think that would give you enough. Right. I think I've talked about a lot of these things already. We're just about out of time. The last thing I wanted to put in, a little bit of a kudos to Dr. Murray's class. I don't have enough money in my budget to buy a SAS license, so I just got the R programming language, and there's a plant breeding module that goes with it. I'll be doing all my statistical analysis with it. So, thanks to him for introducing us to that. And let's see, I think that it's 1 o'clock, so we can just go ahead and take a question or two if anybody has anything.
We actually are out of time. However, let's thank him, and then do you have any time afterwards? People can come and ask questions, because I know there are some people in here that have meetings to go to.
Okay.
So, thank you very much.